Welcome, listeners and lurkers. This is Helping Hands Therapy Notes after the game.
We had our first Pathfinder game last night, and LadyLili was our GM. She was so gracious and wonderful. This will be our first of a series of after game thoughts of episodes. We're going to try to record something after each of our sessions. And we're going to dive into some thoughts, lore, and just overall nerdy discussion. So we're going to start by turning it over to Lily. She can give us some setting, give us the idea of what the setting was and how we play the game and just how she GMs. And we're going to dive into this nerdy stuff. So, LadyLili, take us into the fantasy realm of Pathfinder.
So, Pathfinder is a tabletop role playing game very similar to Dungeons and Dragons in that it is set in a high fantasy world. It uses the D20 system, but it does have its own sets of rules, and they actually already have their own licensing system called the Orc that they got away from the OGL. Some of you listeners may know about this. And so they have their their own setting, which is called the Lost Omens setting. The planet that they're on is Galarian. And currently in the game that we're playing, we're starting with the beginner box module called Menace under Otari. And then we'll be transitioning into Abomination Vaults with the expanded Abomination Vaults that was written, and as well as Troubles in Otari. And so they're in Absalom. Well, they're in Otari, just outside of Absalom on the Isle of Kortos, which is in the middle of a large sea between the continents of Avacyn and Garoon. You can easily look up maps and find these locations if you would like to read about them. But so they're in Otari, and they've each come to Otari for various reasons. There's 3 player PCs or player characters. One is run by my husband. One is run by January's partner, and then one is run by January. Since I'm the GM, I do not have a player character in the game. I run all the NPCs. So let's start with the backstory for your character, January.
Okay, let's see. So my character, her name is Tsunami. Spelled like the word, also known as Sue. And this is the backstory I wrote for her. Her recent memory isn't one of childhood or first love. She opened her eyes to find herself strapped to a bed in a place that looked like an infirmary or lab. Her body ached and felt unfamiliar, yet still her own. The fog subsided from her eyes, and she could now see clearly a robed figure standing over her. "Can you hear me? Nod if you can hear me." The voice was a man's, deep, soft, and alluring in a way that made her feel unsure and afraid. She nodded. "You are Tsunami. Your old life is gone." At that moment, she realized the man was right. She couldn't remember who she was, where'd she'd come from, or why she was here. The fear intensified and her body began to shake. That's what she felt it. Them. Tiny tentacle-like appendages of small, varying sizes vibrating on her neck and arms, maybe other places. She heard the voice again. "My name is Strom. Your fear is unfounded. You are safe now." As he spoke, he unbound her restraints and helped her sit up. Her body continued to shake uncontrollably. A sudden wave of pain hit her head, and she instinctively raised her hands to cradle it. She gasped. No hair, only skin, and more. It was a larger version of the smaller appendages she first noticed. A giant fleshy tentacle extending from her head about 4 or 5 feet. Horrified, she screamed. Breathing heavily, she looked into the face of the man standing before her. What? Forming words felt unfamiliar, and she stared desperately, waiting for answers from the only person she could ask in this moment. Strom made a gesture with his hands and mumbled unfamiliar words under his breath. She felt a warmth wash over her, and all was much calmer. The shaking stopped, and her head felt clear enough to observe her host, or captor. A human male of average height, dark, unkempt hair, and piercing gold eyes that seemed to know her every thought. You are Tsunami. Your old life is gone. You have been made anew. Strom's pale skin, of someone who doesn't go out much, twitched slightly at the corners of his mouth. He hesitated and briefly glanced upwards towards her head appendage. The process is unpredictable, but it was the only way I could save you. You were almost dead when I found you. She looked at him with confusion and frustration. He seemed to know what she was asking. I don't know how you got that way, and I don't know where you're from. Your body was so broken when I found it, I couldn't identify your origins. There are side effects to the procedure, but it's better than taking your last breath. Some who undergo it do not survive or come out looking so monstrous that they have to live secluded lives. You are changed, but acceptable. Tsunami reactively shook her head in disagreement, and her head tentacles swung back and forth, landing on one shoulder. She gasped at the unfamiliar sensation, but also sensed a power there. She glanced down at herself and took in what she saw. A middle-aged female with skin the color of midday sky on a clear summer day. It seemed to ripple in the candlelight, but only when you weren't directly looking at it. She noticed the tiny bumps along her arms that eventually turned into smaller tentacles closer to her neck and shoulders, eventually becoming the larger arm on top. While examining herself, the large flesh arm moved, and Sue quickly realized she could move it just like an arm or a leg. She extended the arm to touch the face of the man who called himself Strom, and with much effort said, Thank you for my life. He smiled, pleased with himself. You're welcome. And thus began the new life for Tsunami. For the next few years, she stayed with Strom, learning how to walk and talk all over again. Life with him was relatively simple. He wasn't a warm man. In fact, he was most pragmatic, insisting she had some yet unknown purpose to fulfill, but never expanded on the subject, even when she pressed him about it. Her mind was quick to notice and learn from everything around her. She found the curiosity drove her. The more Strom taught her, the more she wanted to learn. There were so many questions to be answered, especially the question of who she was before this transformation. Did she have family? Do they miss her? Was she a criminal? Many nights were spent restlessly agonizing over the unknowns of her past. And when sleep does come, it's filled with strange dreams of caterpillars spinning their chrysalises with opalescent ooze, changing into moths and butterflies, and then repeating the process all over again. All while a distant voice whispers, Akriti, over and over. Other times she dreamt of water, drifting in an endless sea with an infinite dark blue depth that pulled at her core. Tsunami soon learned that Strom was a retired alchemist living in the Nexian city of Onopian, apparently well known for alchemical production. The manufacturing of potions and elixirs are a huge factor in the economy. In addition to the golem works and high-quality homunculi creation, there are alchemist mage-run fleshwork laboratories, which is where Sue ended up. She was fleshworked by Strom, a retired alchemist who now only continued the work as a hobby. The years she spent with Strom were at first like a parent caring for a child, and it quickly became reversed as Strom's health began to rapidly decline. The cause was unclear, but he seemed to believe it was a side effect of his work with alchemical flesh warping. As he lay dying, Sue begged him to teach her to perform the procedure on him. She couldn't bear losing the only person she's known in this strange world she woke up in. Even if he was lacking warmth, he still protected her. But he refused. Strom had destroyed any written record of his work years before and had been relying on his memory since then. Now he was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do but make him comfortable. News seeming to be creditors greedily came inquiring after his research and any leftover supplies they could scavenge. Sue didn't have it in her to fight them back. She was devastated by this loss, and the trauma of losing her past sent her into an emotional spiral. She had to escape. There was nothing left here in Onopian anymore. But where could she go? Sue packed the basics: some food for a week's journey on the road, a small medicine kit, her walking stick, and the full-size cloak Strom gave her after her first year with him. A heavy, dark blue fabric with tiny waves sewn in with silver thread as trim. He had made it with a hood that could make her appendage look less conspicuous in public. She blew out all the lamps and candles except one, taking one final look at her home for the last few years. And then Tsunami tipped over the burning candle onto a nearby pile of rags and left the city, never to return. It was a frigid night with a clear sky for stargazing. At the edge of the city, she looked up and found what she was looking for: Cynosure, the Golarian North Star. Sue remembered the night Strom passed. She had a dream she had never had before. It started out like the butterfly metamorphosis dreams, but this time when it changed into a butterfly, the cycle didn't repeat, and the voice whispered a different name: Desna. She knew that name. Sue thought back to the recent conversation she had with some local and traveling acolytes of Desna. Their religious regalia covered in butterfly symbols and imagery. She was curious to find if they knew something of Akriti and the dream she'd been haunted by. They explained that Desna, goddess of dreams, stars, travelers, and luck, is believed to rule from and reside on Cynosure. It was only the wandering acolytes that spoke of Akriti, the ever-shifting, a primordial ooze deity that represents the ever-evolving nature of creation of life, as well as the unknown. Akriti has no permanent temples. Instead, acolytes roam the country with portable temples of clay and paper. She needed to find out more about these deities and what significance they have to her. Why is she having these dreams? Looking up again at Cynosure, Tsunami finalized her decision to go north, looking for more answers to who she was before.
Beautiful.
And that is the story of Sue.
All right. So next, I'm going to read January's partner's backstory. His character's name is Boaz, and he is an Azarketi, which are aquatic humanoids. They share a somber and burdened history, for they were Aslanti prior to the Earthfall, which is a global cataclysm where a star of sorts crashed to Galarian. Actually, two Aslanti deities brought themselves into the universe, previously known as the material plane, and put themselves before the Starstone, as it's called, and sacrificed their lives to slow it down to where it did not destroy the planet altogether. And it caused a massive cataclysm. And so when that happened, these Aslanti were eventually transformed into the Azarketi, the more aquatic humanoids. They were mutated by their as being considered servants of what are called Algothu. They are I cannot remember what they're called in 5th edition in D&D, but they were masterminds very deep into the earth that were controlling society. So Boaz is this Azarketi, and this is his story. Boaz was born in the coastal town of Oshuna, a place often overlooked by cartographers, being populated largely by Azarketi and other non-humans. Boaz was born without means. even compared to other relatively impoverished townfolk. Living a somewhat lackey existence, his parents loved and cared for him, but often would neglect him when in their drug-induced stupors. Tesh, Playleaf, and occasionally Quat makes his way into the town, and the town-trodden folk are all too eager to forget their troubles. His infatuation with the occult, the arcane, and the obscene began when wandering the town, getting away from a particularly nasty Quat-induced spat between his parents. To call the building a library would be generous, but nevertheless there was an archive of sorts attached to the town meeting hall. It generally included lineages, cookbooks, survival guides, and various utility-based or historical documents. The selection was light, but Boaz found himself unable to put them down. After almost 2 years, there was no longer a book in town he hadn't read. He had begun to do favors and odd jobs in order to bring in money, and traveling merchants occasionally brought books with them. Not many. It was clear this town's priorities didn't often include literature, and the merchants knew what the real demand was. The few books a year he might be lucky enough to buy or persuade a merchant to part with from their own collections did not satiate his curiosity, and he became especially enamored with tales of treasure hunters, artifact seekers, antiquarians, and the like. The tales of their exploits filled him with awe, and he imagined himself one day braving the depths of a tomb or scouring the decaying halls of a once proud keep in search for items of significance. It wasn't the prospect of riches that interested him, but the knowledge itself. Magic itself was an extension of knowledge as much as connection to the otherworldly, and he was determined to learn as much about it as he could. One day, after coming home from a fruitless expedition to a local cave, he found much of the townsfolk gathered around his house. Pushing aside the crowd and demanding to know what was going on, he emerged from the press and saw it. Through the open front door of his home, he saw them. His mother was on the ground, her head at an unnatural angle. His father sat on the ground, not even looking up at the 2 guards flanking him. She was hiding it from me. She was hiding it, and I found it. Can't hide it from me. I told her not to. I told her not to. There was an odd smile across his lips, and his eyes were glazed over, bloodshot. At that moment, Boaz didn't even recognize his father. Whoever his father was before, this person was a stranger now. Plots usually had the effect of dulling their senses, but not always. It was clear what had happened, and Boaz didn't even bother asking his father why. Didn't bother talking to the guards, asking them where he could stay. He was certain he never wanted to sleep another night in that house again. He never wanted to hear the awful gibbering laughter or the mournful wails of regret or the endless platitudes and excuses that they would tell him about how it's just what adults do. Everyone does it. Boaz turned around, walked back through the crowd and out of it. He heard some of them call after him, concerned, but he never looked back. He headed back to the cave at the edge of the town and entered. He walked and crawled deeper than he had ever gone before, until the dim blackness was so pervasive even his keen eyes failed him. He groped around in the darkness, sure he was already lost and going to die. Not caring, he pushed on. He eventually heard a sound, a faint noise in some far-off place. It was barely loud enough to make out. It was like white noise. He followed it in the darkness, using his sense of hearing and touch to guide him. He fell and scraped and bruised his body in the pitch blackness, but never stopped following the ever-growing sound of what he finally recognized was rushing water. He walked and walked, the sound growing louder, becoming almost deafening in the otherwise deathly stillness of the deep cave. One wrong step, and he suddenly realized he was falling, tumbling through the air. He closed his eyes and laughed in his mind. He hoped they would worry about him, except his father. He didn't think about him at all. Falling through the void, he plunged headfirst into almost freezing water. The subterranean river stung his bruises and wounds, and created more as it ushered him along a pitch-black serpentine thread, bashing his arms and legs against the ever-changing direction of the river. All of a sudden, he was out of the water, falling again. This time he fell a long ways. He splashed down hard into an underground lake. The blow of hitting water nearly killed him, and he lost consciousness in the deep dark of that hidden grotto. There he lay at the bottom of this inky void, near death and exhausted. His hand groped blindly along the floor. He tasted the plumes of silt entering his gills, making it harder to breathe, and was sure this was how he was going to die. Until his hand brushed against something not quite raw, not quite as cold as everything around him. It graced his hand with unexpected warmth. He grasped the handle, felt a curious round protrusion, and all of a sudden, he felt something change. He was here, at the bottom of the forgotten place, but he was also somewhere else at the same time. His sensations doubled. His eyes beheld both total darkness and the faintest glimmer of light. As once as he felt solid ground, dry ground beneath his feet, and at the same time the cold embrace of the water suffocating his entire being. The silt was in his gills, clogging them. He started to feel pain, and then dryness. His vision was once again. He was standing, still, terribly wounded, but alive and standing. He was no longer suffocating. He was not sure how he had gotten to the stone outcropping, but he saw through the dimness a faint glowing coming from the far side of the cave. It illuminated almost nothing, but he could see now the surface of the lake he had been in. It stretched around him in all directions, a vast underground chamber. He could not make out how far or high the walls were, but he now realized he was no longer afraid, no longer hurt. He was curious. He remembered that thing he had grasped at the bottom of the lake. He realized it was somehow still in his right hand. He looked down to find a mirror. It was simple, with no adornments, a perfectly circular silver rim with a handle slightly larger at the bottom than the top. It fit perfectly in his palm. With newfound purpose, he looked again at the faint glowing in the far distance. He couldn't die now, not when he had so many questions. Determinedly, he set across the lake, his eyes fixed on the dim circle in the distance. A day later, he emerged from the cave, starving and lost. It was mid-morning, and the blinding light of the beginnings of dawn and end of twilight assaulted his senses. It was not at all recognizable where he had entered. He didn't recognize anything, but in the distance he saw a thin black strip that might have been a road. Forcing himself to continue walking, he made it most of the way before succumbing to his exhaustion. On the road, a curious wagon jingled idly down the way, its driver whistling a merry tune, which was abruptly cut short. Along the edge of the path, a small bluish form lay still, arms outstretched, reaching for succor. The driver signaled for the beast pulling it to stop and stepped down. The man walked over, knelt, and laid a hand on the exposed, bruised shoulder of this young man. A soft, golden glow emanated from his palm for but an instant, and suddenly there was movement. Shoulders relaxed and tense, and a wary blue face looked up from the dirt, looking directly into the eyes of the strangely adorned and mustachioed human. Boaz saw the cart behind him and weakly croaked, "Where are you going?" "Galduria." A slow smile spread across his lips. This was a name he knew. At age 24, Boaz was already adept in the service of the Twilight Academy and was able to secure a modest room for himself in the lower levels of the keep, and made himself an invaluable assistant to Master Raquel, the man who had saved him. Raquel never asked about his past, seeing the pain in his eyes the moment he first looked up at him. Boaz's curiosity and penchant for adventure forced him to learn an entirely new set of skills. His slow acclimation of esoteric knowledge and martial ability born from necessity by the nature of the work he helped Master Raquel with. Always with a wry grin, Master Raquel tended to throw Boaz into the most dangerous of situations, and yet Boaz had never once felt betrayed or put down by it. Instead, he had a sense that he was only being tested, that Master Raquel didn't only believe in him, but had a sense of an unknowable greater destiny. Time and time again, Boaz proved himself. The mirror became a part of him, and through many trials he found ways not only to use it, but to deftly turn a dire situation to his advantage, almost instinctually. By age 26, Master Raquel was becoming consumed with higher works and the demands of his station. More and more, Boaz felt the gentle push from his former master, a nudge that told him without words, "It's time to go. You are ready." Boaz would always have a home in the Twilight Academy, but his heart was out there in the deep, wild world, and he felt the overwhelming need to follow it. On a day not long after his 27th birthday, packing up only what he needed, he walked out of the front gate of the keep. His armor jingled softly with each step as artifacts, bones, and trinkets that adorned him made their clacking, tinkling music. He set out, not looking back. And that is Boaz's backstory.
Awesome. Do we have a backstory for the other character, Nelro?
I have a little bit of. I do not have a beautifully written story, but Nilro is a human wizard who had just previously graduated from the Academirium in Absalom. He graduated under strange circumstances, and so immediately left for fear of being found out how he graduated, as he wasn't a star pupil to begin with, and then quickly rose in the ranks. He is a thin, pale human with dark, unkempt hair that is slightly going gray. He has disheveled clothes, though a silver ring with an eye of amethyst and an onyx star set in it. He also has a black cat that is blacker than night. For the listeners, you would know it as Vanta Black. With supernaturally dark. This cat has large eyes that always seem to be reflecting moonlight. He has come to Atari to get out of Absalom and get away from the Academirium for fear of them finding out what had truly happened. And the party all met at various times a individual known as Ren Savinci, who is a Nephilim, previously a tiefling elf, who runs a curio shop named Ren's Wonders in Atari. She asked each of these individuals to help her friend Tamley Tandervale, who runs the fishery, which is, of course, a fishery, but doubles as kind of a speakeasy at night. To help her out with a problem she's been having. She's requested the guards' help, but they're just too busy with something going on with the lumberers, as the town is both a fishing town and a lumber town. And so they have not had time to deal with her situation. So they all were asked to help out, and she had a situation in the basement of some kind of creature getting in and devouring her fish. So the party met at the fishery. Boaz met Sue first and was immediately interested in everything about her. And Sue, how did Sue feel?
I think she was immediately interested in everything about him because he was a similar color and clearly had some aquatic attachment, some sort of elemental backstory. And she's always felt an affinity to that as well. So there was just this sort of instinctual, primal familiarity that she felt, and was immediately curious.
And then Nilro walked in with his cat, Samal, and greeted the party. And Boaz, of course, was immediately curious about him. Sue.
Yeah, she really reacted strongly to Nilro as well because there were elements of his appearance and his demeanor that really reminded her of the alchemist that that had saved her.
Right.
The disheveled appearance, an older man with a connection to the arcane. And then she loves animals, so when she saw the black cat, she immediately wanted to pet him, but Nilro recommended that she not, and that was okay with her, but she's just sort of waiting till she gets a chance to pet that cat.
Yes, he responded with, they would prefer if he did not, seemingly
Yes.
as if he conversed with Samal and got Samal's opinion on it.
That's right, because the kitty meowed. He asked, I guess, like he asked, or Samal responded. That's right.
Yes.
That was cute.
And so then they went into the basement after having drinks. Sue and Nilro both got ales, while Boaz got a fancy wine. They talked a little bit about each other's past and asked what Nilro's deal was. He was very uncertain and nervous about talking about it, but said that he had just graduated and he was on what seemed like a sabbatical afterwards. So they headed downstairs. The room was lit with everlight crystals, and several barrels were smashed. And as they came around the corner, they were greeted by giant rats. The party engaged in the rats, and Sue, goodness gracious, out of 4 rats, got the "how do you want to do this" on 3 of them.
That head appendage, man, that really helped out.
She is a Magus monk. We are dual classing because it is such a small party. And she is able to use her head appendage or tendril to make her unarmed attacks. And then, of course, spell strike with it, as she is a Magus. And man, gouging claw is such a spell. I can't believe it's a cantrip.
Yeah, that one is great. For those of you who don't know what gouging strike is, it's basically a claw appears at the end of whatever weapon you choose, and you can choose have an unarmed weapon, so it could be a claw at the end of your fist, or for my character, it's a claw at the end of her tendril. Or there was one attack that I did where I made the claw come out of my bow staff at the end of the bow staff because the bow staff had reach. So you can do that also with claw strike, which I thought was cool.
Yes, with gouging claw.
With gouging claw, yeah.
Don't worry, you'll learn the names of spells as you go.
I did. I said gouging strike, huh?
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Yes, I'm definitely new to, just for the listeners, I'm new to Pathfinder. I'm way more familiar with D&D, but it's really fun transition, actually. And Lily is an amazing GM and teacher, and so is her husband, who's joining us. He's been a wonderful resource of information.
I'm glad. I am so glad. I love teaching people. Most of my players have been new to it at the beginning, and I just want to foster a good time and want to make sure everyone's having fun. That's the most important part. So and my games are very ADHD heavy, so we get off on tangents and just have a good time. It's playing the game, but also just spending time with friends.
Absolutely, absolutely. And something that is really cool that Lily does for her games is that we do it through Discord and a program called Foundry. We're sort of using both. And in Discord, there's one of the rooms that she created that's for memes and shit posting. And so it's this place where you can post funny memes to sort of mess with the other players or get them to laugh or just be, overall entertaining, and which is a new dynamic for me. And I'm really finding it hilarious and fun. And I love the relaxed, calm nature of the table. It's the acceptance, the patience. It really added to me feeling comfortable and pushing myself outside the awkward zone, So that was fun, and I'm so excited about playing this character and getting to know the other characters too.
Me too. It's gonna be great. I'm so excited. There's gonna be some new elements that even Eric, Eric, he's my husband, even that he is not familiar with, because I'm using a new somebody, I can't remember the name of the person right now, but wrote a expanded version of Abomination Vault, so they changed some information and added information that felt like that the original adventure path didn't expand on very well. And so I'm using that, so it's even stuff that he's not familiar with, because even our friend that is running it, because, by the way, just for clarity, I personally am either running or in four games of Abomination Vaults. I'm running 2 and I'm in 2.
That's so awesome.
Yes. So, which is funny because originally when Eric started talking about playing Abomination Vaults, I was dead set on not playing it because it's a mega dungeon. And the only thing I knew about mega dungeons was Tombs of Horror. And I was like, I don't want to play a Tomb of Horror game. I want story and my character to continue and not just completely fucking die all the time. And so it took me a long time to agree to playing Abomination Vaults, and he kept telling me over and over, it's not like Tombs of Horror. It's not like, it's not a funhouse dungeon. It is a mega dungeon, but it's not a funhouse dungeon. So there is story, there is, substance there. And so I finally agreed to it, and now I'm in 4 different games.
That's so awesome. Now, you were saying that there was this other dungeon game that you were like, I don't really, if it's like that, I don't want to play with it. What did you call it again?
Tombs of Horror.
Tombs of Horror. Now, what is it about that you don't like playing? Do you feel like it's more confining?
Have you ever heard of it?
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, so it is I think it's a 3.5, or it might even be older dungeon.
Oh, you know what? Yes, it's for Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yes.
I actually have heard of it.
There's traps like in every room and puzzles, and you die all the time.
Yeah, I heard it's basically meant to sort of fulfill the DM's fantasy of killing the entire party all the time.
Yeah, kind of. Because it's like, okay, new room, look for traps, don't touch anything, don't even breathe on anything, and there's not really any story to it. The story is that a mad mage created this and you're trying to get out of it.
Oh, okay.
So that's all there is to it. There's no substance.
Gotcha.
And I think it was originally like having different people create different rooms.
Okay.
And like whole writer groups just creating their how would you kill your party room. And I think that's originally how it came about. Don't don't quote me on that. If you know the story of it, feel free to leave it in the comments. Just don't be mean about it. But yeah, it's so I thought, because it is also a mega dungeon, because it's this huge dungeon that you have to get through. And Abomination Vault is considered a mega dungeon because it has multiple layers. That is like, it is several layers deep. And so it's considered a mega dungeon. And that just, that knowledge of Tombs of Horror scared me, because I did, like, if there were rules and I knew that I was going into Funhouse Dungeon and we had rules like you created 5 characters that you're going to play, and you just, when you die, you just start over and rotate through it until you get through the thing or something. If there's like fun rules like that, and I know that I'm going into it, and not to have like deep backstories and connections to the characters like I do with most, other regular APs and stuff, then I could play it. But I didn't, that's not what I wanted to do at the time. And so, but he finally got me into it, because I started listening to a podcast called Tabletop Gold that was also, I think they finished it, or they're very close to finishing it now, but that was running Abomination Vaults as well. And I started realizing that there was a story to it. There was actually story and substance. And so I finally agreed to play it.
Awesome. And so what level are you in the other games where you're a character?
In one game,
or how far into it are you, I guess I should say.
In one game, we've just started delving into the Abomination Vaults themselves. In that game, we also did the beginner box and are doing Troubles in Atari. It's kind of, it's not, you don't have to do those 2 things, but it really gives you more of a reason to be an Atari and fleshes it out a little bit more. And so we're only like 2nd or 3rd level in that game, and we've just started delving into Gauntlet, the actual Abomination Vaults. And that campaign is actually, the character I'm playing in that is transported from a different reality, where she's a child, because Eric and I run often duet games. We've run several duet games, and we have our own kind of canon world that all those take place in. And one of our games, we played Reign of Winter, and she is a child of my PC and Eric's PC in Reign of Winter. She is the youngest daughter, and the only one that her father was a tiefling as well, and she's the only one that came out as a tiefling. Or Nephilim, as they're called now in the remaster. But, and on her 20th birthday, she was transported back in time to the year that she was born, and transported to another reality where her family, none of that exists. The people that she knows don't exist. And
wow.
This was done, so her father has connections to Nyarlathotep. And Nyarlathotep fucked with him for a while, and then kind of got bored with him. And then he had a kid, and so he was kind of watching him, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna play around. I'm gonna fuck with you. What if?" And so he made a deal with somebody else, some other elder deity, and they worked together and transported her, and messed with time and stuff. And in the in the canon world of Eric and I, nobody else remembers her except for her dad. And she was like a daddy's girl. She was he called her his little shadow. And so he's the only one that remembers her, and everybody else she doesn't exist to them. And so that's driving him insane. And he's a sorcerer oracle and has access to what's called the Akashic Record, which has all knowledge ever existence in any reality. But also, Nyarlathotep has more power there. And so he's currently scouring the record. He's spending a lot of time in the record, but that's leaving him vulnerable to Nyarlathotep's influence. And so we're only technically a couple weeks into the game. And so things haven't really happened that much yet. But I'm so excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, that was some deep backstory lore.
Yes.
Sounds fun to explore.
It is.
You'll have to give us some updates on some future after the games about, your other games, and
sure,
give us some updates on what your characters are going through.
Nice. Yeah, I would love to. And then the other game that I'm in, we're like level 5, I think, and we're down on like the 5th level of the dungeon, I think. We might be level 7. I don't remember. But we're on, I think, the 5th level of the dungeon. And she is also an oracle sorcerer. And she is also a Nephilim tiefling. And she is from essentially what is known as Velstrok in this world, but is akin to Cenobites. And so she enjoys some amount of pain, and she does, like, what is the word? It's not self-harm necessarily, but it's like,
is it like masochism?
Yes, but she cuts on herself to make like specific marks, designs, and it's like tattooing, but doing it with scars.
Scarification?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And she does also get tattoos, and she's about to, once she levels up, she'll learn how to tattoo herself. But she does scarification to create things on her body, and she enjoys that pain. And her favorite spell is needle darts, which you got to see last night Nilro do.
That's right.
And she keeps a couple balls of metal on her, and she loves it because she loves needles, and so which creeps out. She's very creepy. She's what I call my bitch character. And she's very off-putting and creepy, and she fucks with Eric's character all the time because he's from a place that is inhabited by these Velstrok, and they're evil creatures, evil entities, and they've had interactions with him, and he obviously has trauma from it. And so it fucks with him that she's a descendant of one of them. And it's so much fun to get out those impulses in a safe environment where you're not actually hurting anybody.
Yeah, I really appreciate the atmosphere that role-playing gives to sort of express stuff that you may not be able to express in any, real life situation. So that's super fun. Exactly. I noticed that you like to use Nephilim / Tiefling characters. Is there a particular thing that resonates with you about that? About that?
I like their appearance. I used to be strict. I used to be drawn to ASMRs, because of their, like, the jeweled aspect of their, like, eyes, and the metal aspect of their hair, because their hair is supposed to be colored like some metal. Their eyes are supposed to look like jewels of some sort, and they're just supernaturally beautiful. And it was because I didn't feel beautiful. So I wanted to play a character that was beautiful. And then I transitioned. I played other ancestries, half elf, elf, geniekin of various sorts. But I definitely like the strangeness of tieflings. Love having horns. Love the different shapes of them. And tails. I love having a tail because I like messing with people with my tail, like grabbing them and stuff. I always give it the ability to grab. That is one of the feats that I always take when my character has a tail, and I like, and I also like that they have a conflict in them, because tiefling Nephilim are from generally evil creatures, and they have a struggle inside them to, if they want to be good.
Yeah.
And so I like that struggle, because I deal with that struggle. I strive to be good, but that's not always some wants and instincts that I have. There are times where I want to hurt people because they've hurt me, but I choose to be better than that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's something
relate.
that tieflings have to deal with, is making an active choice to be good if they're going to be good, unless they're going to embrace that darkness.
Yeah.
And
very well said.
So with Saya, the Shackleborn tiefling, my bitch character, she embraces that darkness a little bit more than most of my other tieflings have done. They've always they have this darkness in them, and so they strive to be the best that they can be to overpower that darkness. And she kind of embraces it a little bit more, and she gets a kick out of putting people off, and it's kind of that sadistic, masochistic part of her.
She sounds like a fun character to play with too.
I try to do my best to give good backstories to all my characters, and even one of my favorite characters. It's funny because Eric and I were starting a new campaign, and I was struggling really bad with creating a character. And finally one day he said, "We're going to play. You got 2 hours to create a character." And I created one of my favorite characters, not the favorite, but her name is Rain, and she was a cleric druid, and she became, and her romance with Eric's character became one of my favorites. She definitely embodies my more whimsical self.
That's awesome. I like that. Now, do you have a character that you identify with the most?
I do. So Elliswyn is the character that I identify with the most. She is the character that I played in Shattered Star, which is the second in the Rune Lord saga. Again, it took place in our canon world, and she actually was she was an oracle rogue that multi-classed or archetyped into wizard eventually. And she had her own trauma, and she was orphaned and left in the worst part of city, and she grew up with the Scarni, which are akin to like the mob in a way.
Okay.
And so she grew up in a part of town that was heavily controlled by them, and she was used and abused by them until she started, getting her own footing, and became worked in one of the groups, gangs that they had. and she also ended up because you had to have a day job even if you were a thief at night, you know. And
Right.
so she started working in taverns and became a dancer. And eventually she worked her way up to being in the most famous tavern club in town, the Gilded Cage. And she was what are known in this world, I call them sky dancers, but they were aerial acrobatics.
Oh,
They used
okay.
silks, and she used silks to dance.
Awesome.
And so eventually she was working for what the gang called the Tower Girls, and eventually she was making more money as the dancer than she was getting from working for the Tower Girls. And so, of course, you can't just like leave a gang. So she, with her persuasion, persuaded them to basically pay them off, and she didn't have to do jobs for them anymore. And so she
Nice.
did that for several years, and then at the climax of the first campaign, it triggered something, a massive magical outburst, and that's when she got her oracle powers. And it was directly related to the end of the first campaign. And so the people from our characters from the first campaign became famous. Eric's character became a politician in the city that Elliswin was in. And he wrote books about their adventures, and she devoured those books. And then she began petitioning to meet them. And it took a long time even into the campaign of Shattered Star before she actually got to meet them. And by the time that she met them, so it takes place, spoilers for all this Rune Lord saga. There are Rune Lords that, or were, back in before Earthfall, the Starstone. There were extremely powerful wizards, and they used sin magic. So the sins: greed, lust, gluttony, and there was one that there's been multiple of most of them, but only one at a time, like leader of the sub country in Thassalon that was a Rune Lord. And so while delving into a ruin that was controlled by the Rune Lord of Lust, Sortian, they came across a duplicate body of hers, a copy. And Elliswin, out of character, I was like, no, I'm not going to touch this. I want to so bad, but I'm not going to touch her. She wants to touch her. Because she was bejeweled. The body was beautifully preserved. And Eric, as the GM, goaded me on. He was like, come on, you want to touch it. You want to just feel it. You just want to take a ring. Well, nobody's going to notice a ring. And so I was like, fine. And so she went to take one of the rings, and magical explosion happened, and she was struck dead. Her companion Ramiel was there, and he just watched her, as what she saw was Sortian standing in front of her, grinning, just like in one of those, that evil grin. And then she was dead. And she was in blackness, and she opened her eyes, and she was laying in a velvet-lined box. And she sat up, her head was pounding, and she saw Ramiel standing across from her, horrified, as what he saw was the body of Sortian rise up. And she was transported, the spell, there was a highest level I can't remember what it's called. Phantasmal Killer, that's what it is. There was the highest level Phantasmal Killer that was cast on her, but because it degraded over the millennia that had been since it had been placed here, it malfunctioned and reincarnated her in the body. So originally what it was supposed to do is if Sortion died, she would be reincarnated into one of her duplicates. And so it malfunctioned and killed Elliswyn and then reincarnated her in the body instead of it being like Sortion, it happening to Sortion. And so she ended up taking her body, switching, because she was in like very risque clothes. So switching clothes, putting her body in the bag of holding, casting gentle repose on it, and carried her body around in the bag of holding and pulled it out and cast gentle repose on it every day. And so when she met Dante, Eric's character from the first campaign, she walked in as Sortion, and he knew who Sortion was. So he was very off-put. And then they started working together, and she was my very sexual character. She would fuck anyone.
Okay.
And
so it was a character that you could explore that avenue of yourself.
Explore it and kind of let out, and just that primal, and also feeling like you're not worth more than that.
Yeah.
And so she ended up going along the campaign, and Ramiel was the goodest of good boys. He was a champion of Iomedae, which is like the paladin deity, and he was raised in the church. So you have Elliswyn, this promiscuous, not good person. She was chaotic neutral. And then the most lawful, goodest of boys, she was kind of learning because he wasn't giving up on her. And so they ended up becoming, by the end of the campaign, best friends. He was like her brother to her. So still Elliswyn, so brother that she fucked, because he became a buff, just, oh my god. He dropped dead gorgeous. But because his strength ended up going up, and so he became, as the campaign went on, he became buff. But she never did. They never did. He was celibate. But she ended up going to the city named Kermaga, and they have to get up to the city. It's on a very, very high cliff. You go through a channel, a cavern that leads up to the rise, and these people called Dusk Wardens are like guides, because it's through what's called the Undercity, because the city has been built upon and built upon and built upon and built upon. So it goes all the way down through the 1,000-foot cliff. And so you have to travel through the Undercity to get to the rise. And this Dusk Warden led them up, and his name was Abra. And he said that she reminded him of his ex-wife, or his wife, who had been murdered by a creature known as the Dark Rider, who is a very special Duahan. And he said that he didn't even get to bury her body because the Duahan, the Dark Rider, took her head. And so he told her that she reminded, and she was caught off guard by this, but also he was hot, and she was still Elliswyn. And so she ended up going on kind of a date with him while they were in the city. She didn't know anybody else in the city, and so she asked him to show her around. Eventually they had to go into the Undercity, and so she told Abra about it, and he was like, I'm going with you. And they ended up journeying, and he didn't pull his punches. He called her out on her shit. And nobody's ever done that before. Nobody's challenged her in that way. Nobody's cared enough. And so she kind of was, even more attracted to him. And she ended up they ended up fighting and killing the Dark Rider, and he got his wife's head back. So he went to where he buried her body and basically reburied and was re-grieving his wife. Elliswyn was Elliswyn, and she very, very badly tried to come on to him just like 2 days after that. And he was like, no. He was like, that's crossing a boundary. And she got a spell called Sending, and while they spent a couple months back in Magnamore after leaving Kaer Morga, left him there in Kaer Morga because his job was a desk warden. She would send him messages at night talking about the things that they were doing in Magnamore while they're essentially waiting for their equipment to get done, upgrading. And he responded, and she still talked to him every night before she went to bed. And this happened, she did this and kept the spell slot available for Sending every night for like 3 months. And he didn't have to respond, and he could, and he did. And so right before they fought the big bad of the next book, she told him that she missed him, and he admitted that he missed her too. And so they ended up finishing the big bad of that book, and she got a wand of teleportation and teleported back to Kaer Morga to see him. They spent a wonderful day together and ended up confessing that they, loved each other. And they spent a wonderful night together. And they took, she, in her magnificent mansion, she had a spa they took a bath in and other things. And so then he decided that he was going to journey with her. And so by the end of it, he had journeyed with her the rest of the campaign. And at the end, they got married. And it was so beautiful. I have recordings of the session where we did the wedding, because it was like a denouement after the game session.
That's cool.
And I wrote these beautiful vows that even brought Eric to somewhat tears. He was like, well, goddamn, I wasn't expecting that.
That's awesome.
And it was beautiful. And she's my character that grew the most. That she would have been polyamorous had he not been strictly that he was monogamous, and that was something that he needed, and she made a choice instead of being with this other chick that she became best friends with. She chose to be with him and to be monogamous with him. Her ideal thought is, because she also worked on and completed a ritual that will transfer her back into her old body, because she still carries that around with her in her bag of holding. And she's cast this permanent spell on it so it doesn't degrade. And so when she gets old and when Abra dies and she gets old and is about to die, she's going to reincarnate herself back into her old body, which still has many years left. And then the woman that she was also in love with, was a half elf, so she will still have years left. And ideally, her thought process is that she'll then be able to be with her then. But they don't have any children by birth, but in the time spending between when they were apart, Abra had collected a few proteges or whatever, and so they left the Dusk Wardens as well when he left, and so they're kind of his kids and now their kids, and so it's just great. And then they feature in the final chapter, which we haven't finished yet, but they're currently in freeze stasis somewhere in the world that no one knows where they're at. They just kind of have disappeared. but they're frozen in time currently.
Awesome. That's a lot of deep lore. I just wanted to inform our listeners and lurkers that you better have been taking notes on all that because we will be testing you. I'm just kidding.
Yes, there will be, we will be put polls out and tests. So, make sure you know which is my favorite character and stuff like that, So,
We're expecting, detailed drawings and ancestries.
yes.
So please pay attention. This is vital, vital information.
We need to
I'm
make
just
like a
kidding.
Twitter or something where we can post like art from our characters and stuff like that.
Yes, we do have art. Listeners, Lily is also, not only is she a talented GM, but she's also a very talented artist. And she has very quickly just come up with these amazing artist rendering of our characters that all we did was describe it to her. And so we'll figure out a way to upload that so you can get a visual reference to the characters we'll be talking about in each episode.
Yeah.
But on that note, I think that we've covered a lot. We could probably go on and on about nerdy stuff like this for hours and hours, but
Future episodes.
yeah, we got future episodes, so we got to keep you wanting more. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Until our next game, which is going to be in about 2 weeks, and we'll see you again. This is Therapy Notes after the game with JanuaryGarnet and LadyLili.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to love each other.
Bye.
Bye-bye.